when a relationship ends without warning, when someone who promised forever vanishes overnight, when the person who said they wanted stability chooses chaos instead, most people search for rational explanations. They replay conversations, analyze text messages, and desperately try to identify the exact moment everything went wrong. But what if the answer isn't found in what was said or done? What if the real forces driving human connection operate beneath conscious awareness in realms we barely understand? This exploration examines how unconscious psychological patterns, biological imperatives, and childhood programming shape romantic relationships in ways that most people never recognize. These aren't comfortable truths. They challenge modern assumptions about choice, compatibility, and what we think we want versus what we actually respond to. Understanding these dynamics won't make relationships easier, but it will make them clearer. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, is more valuable than comforting illusions. The gap between intention and action. We like to believe we're rational beings who make deliberate choices about whom we love and why. We create mental lists of desired qualities: honesty, loyalty, emotional availability, good communication. We tell ourselves we've learned from past mistakes and know exactly what we need in a partner. Then we act in ways that completely contradict these stated preferences. The person who swears they want stability keeps returning to turbulent relationships. The individual who claims to value honesty finds themselves drawn to people who are evasive and inconsistent. Someone who says they need emotional support repeatedly chooses partners who are emotionally unavailable. This isn't stupidity or weakness. It's the result of unconscious forces that operate with far more power than conscious intention. Psychological research has consistently shown that the majority of human behavior originates below conscious awareness. We make decisions first, then create rational explanations for them afterward. This is especially true in matters of attraction and intimacy, where ancient biological programming and early psychological imprinting exert tremendous influence. The unconscious mind's true power. Think of consciousness as a small island in a vast ocean. What you're aware of, your thoughts, intentions, stated preferences, is just that tiny island. The ocean surrounding it contains everything else: memories you can't access, drives you don't recognize, fears you've never articulated, and patterns established before you had language to describe them. This unconscious realm isn't random or chaotic. It has its own logic, its own priorities, its own agenda. And those priorities often conflict directly with what your conscious mind thinks it wants. Your unconscious mind is concerned with survival and reproduction at the most fundamental level. It's scanning for threats and opportunities based on programming that was established millions of years ago and refined throughout your personal development. It doesn't care about your romantic ideals or modern relationship values. It cares about genetic fitness, tribal belonging, and repeating familiar patterns even when those patterns are destructive. When someone says they want one thing but consistently chooses another, they're not lying. Their conscious mind genuinely believes what it's saying, but their unconscious mind, which actually controls most behavior, is operating according to different rules. Ask someone to describe their ideal partner, and they'll give you a coherent answer. Kind, successful, good communicator, shares my values, treats me well. But put that same person in a room with potential partners who match those criteria, and their actual attraction patterns often tell a completely different story. This happens because stated preferences come from the conscious, socially conditioned mind. They reflect what we've been taught to want, what seems logical, what sounds good when we explain it to others. But actual attraction comes from unconscious processes that don't consult our conscious preferences. Someone might consciously want a stable, predictable relationship because that sounds healthy and mature. But if their nervous system learned to associate love with intermittent reinforcement and emotional volatility, stability will feel wrong. It will register as boring, suffocating, or simply not real love. The conscious mind says, "I want security." The unconscious mind, shaped by years of childhood experience, says, "Security equals complacency equals abandonment." Guess which one wins? This creates a painful paradox. People pursue what they think they want, achieve it, then feel inexplicably disappointed or restless. They blame the other person or the specific circumstances, never recognizing that the real conflict is internal, between conscious ideals and unconscious programming. Every person's first experiences of love, safety, and connection occur in early childhood. The way caregivers respond to needs, handle emotions, provide comfort, and show affection becomes the template for all future relationships. This isn't metaphorical. Actual neural pathways form based on these early interactions. The brain creates maps of what love looks like, how it feels, what it requires, and how reliable it is. These maps become the unconscious blueprint that all future relationships are measured against. If a child's needs were met consistently with warmth and attentiveness, their brain learns that love is safe and reliable. They develop what psychologists call secure attachment, the ability to be intimate without being consumed, independent without being distant, and to trust that connection won't disappear when conflicts arise. But most people don't develop secure attachment. Most people learn some variation of anxious or avoidant patterns based on caregivers who were inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, overly intrusive, or unpredictable. One of psychology's most counterintuitive discoveries is that people unconsciously recreate their earliest relationship dynamics, even when those dynamics were painful or harmful. This is called repetition compulsion, the drive to repeat familiar patterns in an unconscious attempt to master them or resolve them differently. If someone's father was emotionally distant, they might repeatedly choose partners who are similarly unavailable. If their mother was unpredictably warm and then cold, they might seek out relationships with the same push-pull dynamic. If their early environment felt chaotic and unstable, they might unconsciously sabotage stable relationships because they feel unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. This isn't masochism. It's the unconscious mind's attempt to return to familiar territory. Even if that territory was painful, it's known. And to the unconscious mind, known equals safe, even when it's actually destructive. Here's the difficult part. When someone finally encounters a genuinely healthy dynamic, their unconscious mind often rejects it. The person might consciously recognize that this new partner is good for them, treats them well, and offers the stability they claim to want. But unconsciously, it doesn't match their template for what love is supposed to feel like. Healthy love doesn't create the anxiety they learn to associate with caring about someone. It doesn't trigger the abandonment fear that made earlier relationships feel so intense. It doesn't require the hypervigilance they developed to navigate childhood unpredictability. Without those familiar elements, it just doesn't register as love. It feels like something else: friendship, boredom, lack of chemistry. So they leave, convinced something is missing, never recognizing that what's missing is the dysfunction they learned to equate with intimacy. Unhealed wounds seeking familiar pain. Every person carries unresolved experiences from childhood, moments when they felt rejected, misunderstood, controlled, or abandoned. These wounds don't heal simply because time passes. They remain active in the unconscious, influencing behavior in subtle but powerful ways. The unconscious doesn't want to heal these wounds in therapy or through self-reflection. It wants to heal them by recreating similar situations and hoping for a different outcome. This is why people repeatedly find themselves in similar relationship patterns, despite consciously wanting something different. Someone whose parent was critical might choose partners who are similarly judgmental, unconsciously hoping that this time they'll be able to earn approval and finally feel worthy. Someone who felt invisible as a child might gravitate towards self-absorbed partners, hoping to finally be seen. Someone whose love was conditional might test their partner relentlessly, hoping to find someone whose acceptance is truly unconditional. But these unconscious strategies rarely work. The wound doesn't heal through repetition because the original pain didn't come from the current partner. It came from developmental experiences the partner has no power to change. Yet the unconscious keeps trying, choosing familiar pain over unfamiliar peace, beyond conscious preference. Humans like to think of themselves as evolved beings who choose partners based on compatibility, shared values, and emotional connection. But underneath these modern considerations, ancient biological imperatives continue to exert enormous influence. Physical attraction isn't just about aesthetics. It's a complex biological assessment system, evaluating genetic fitness, health markers, hormone compatibility, and reproductive potential. This system operates automatically, below conscious awareness, making judgments that often contradict conscious preferences. Someone might consciously prefer a certain personality type, but find themselves physically drawn to someone completely different. This isn't random. Their biology is detecting something. Pheromones, immune system differences, hormone profiles that their conscious mind knows nothing about. Hormonal cycles and shifting preferences. In women, hormonal fluctuations throughout the menstrual cycle create predictable shifts in attraction patterns, mood, and behavior. During the fertile window around ovulation, when pregnancy is possible, Preferences shift toward traits associated with genetic fitness, physical strength, confidence, facial symmetry, masculine features. During the non-fertile phases, preferences shift toward traits associated with partnership and resource provision, kindness, stability, emotional availability, willingness to invest in offspring. This isn't a conscious choice. The same person who finds someone incredibly attractive during one phase of her cycle might feel neutral or even repulsed by them 2 weeks later. The man hasn't changed. Her hormonal environment has, and it's rewriting her perception of him. Most women aren't consciously aware of these shifts. They experience them as genuine changes in feeling. I thought I liked him, but now I'm not sure. Or, I was so attracted to him at first, but that's faded. They create psychological narratives to explain these changes, never recognizing the biological foundation. This creates particular confusion in modern long-term relationships. A woman might commit to a partner when her hormones are drawing her towards stability and partnership qualities, then feel inexplicable restlessness when her cycle shifts her attraction toward different traits. She interprets this as falling out of love or questioning the relationship, not recognizing it as hormonal rather than relational. The neurochemistry of attachment. Early-stage romantic attraction is essentially a drug experience. The brain releases dopamine, norepinephrine, and phenylethylamine, the same chemicals involved in addiction. This creates euphoria, obsessive thinking, sleeplessness, and intense focus on the other person. This neurochemical cocktail is temporary, usually lasting 6 months to 2 years. When it fades, people often conclude they've fallen out of love or that the relationship isn't working. In reality, their brain chemistry is simply returning to normal. The problem is that many people become addicted to this early-stage intensity. They chase it from relationship to relationship, interpreting the absence of constant euphoria as evidence that something is wrong. They can't differentiate between sustainable love and drug-like infatuation. This addiction becomes even more pronounced in unstable relationships. Intermittent reinforcement, when reward is unpredictable and inconsistent, creates stronger addiction than consistent reward. This is why gambling is addictive and why toxic relationships often create stronger attachment than healthy ones. A relationship with constant drama, breakups and reunions, periods of intense connection followed by distance, creates a powerful neurochemical addiction. The uncertainty triggers dopamine spikes that feel like intense love, but are actually just the brain's reward system responding to unpredictability. Someone in this dynamic will experience genuine withdrawal when it ends. Anxiety, obsessive thinking, physical discomfort. Meanwhile, a stable relationship doesn't trigger these intense neurochemical responses. It feels calm, secure, sometimes even boring by comparison. The brain interprets the absence of chemical intensity as lack of connection, even when the actual relationship quality is far superior. The parts we hide. Every person has aspects of themselves they don't show the world. Desires, impulses, and qualities that conflict with their self-image or social presentation. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the repository of everything we reject, deny, or hide about ourselves. The shadow isn't just negative qualities. It includes positive traits that somehow became unacceptable. Strength in someone taught to be meek, vulnerability in someone taught to be tough, sexual desire in someone taught it was shameful, anger in someone taught to always be nice. These rejected parts don't disappear. They remain active in the unconscious, influencing behavior in ways the conscious mind doesn't recognize. They emerge in dreams, slips of the tongue, inexplicable attractions, and self-sabotaging behaviors. The nice girl and her hidden darkness. Modern culture encourages women to present as empowered, independent, and egalitarian. They're taught to want sensitive partners, equal relationships, and emotional connection. Many genuinely believe this is what they want. But the shadow contains everything this presentation excludes. The desire to be overtaken by someone stronger, to relinquish control, to be pursued rather than pursuing, to experience intensity rather than safety. These desires conflict with conscious values, so they're pushed into the shadow. The shadow doesn't go away. It expresses itself indirectly through fantasy life, attraction to inappropriate partners, or sabotaging relationships that meet conscious criteria but not unconscious needs. A woman might consciously want an emotionally available partner who communicates well and treats her as an equal, but her shadow might crave someone more dominant, less available, more challenging. When she finds the conscious ideal, she feels restless. When she finds someone who activates her shadow, she feels alive, even if the relationship is problematic. This creates immense internal conflict. She can't admit what she's actually responding to because it conflicts with her values and self-image. So she creates other explanations. We didn't have chemistry, or the timing wasn't right, or he was too nice. These rationalizations protect her from confronting the uncomfortable truth about her own shadow desires. When people can't acknowledge their shadow material, they project it onto others. They see in other people what they can't accept in themselves. Someone uncomfortable with their own anger sees other people as hostile and aggressive. Someone who can't accept their own neediness sees their partner as clingy. Someone who rejects their own manipulative tendencies accuses others of manipulation. In relationships, this projection becomes particularly destructive. Rather than owning uncomfortable parts of themselves, people make their partner the problem. They blame, criticize, and eventually leave, convinced the other person was wrong for them. But they carry the same shadow into the next relationship, where the pattern repeats. The man who accepts a woman's shadow, who can see her contradictions, her irrational impulses, her less flattering qualities, without judgment or attempts to fix her, becomes deeply threatening. He's holding up a mirror to parts of herself she's trying to avoid. Rather than face that reflection, she often runs. This is why excessive availability and accommodating behavior can backfire. When someone constantly adjusts themselves to please their partner, they're implicitly saying, "I accept your conscious presentation, but not your full self." The shadow, sensing rejection, creates resistance. Conversely, someone who remains stable amid their partner's contradictions, who doesn't flinch when shadow material emerges, who can hold space for the full spectrum of their partner's personality, that person becomes irreplaceable. They've seen what no one else has been allowed to see and didn't run. Women have engaged in mate selection throughout human evolutionary history, under conditions where choosing poorly could mean death, either their own or their offspring's. This created strong selective pressure for sophisticated evaluation mechanisms. These mechanisms still operate today, even though the survival stakes have changed. They manifest as tests, situations that reveal whether a man possesses qualities that historically correlated with successful partnership and protection. Most men interpret these tests as problems to solve or proof of their worth to demonstrate. But that's precisely what fails the test. The test isn't, can you prove yourself? The test is, are you solid enough that you don't need to prove yourself? Emotional volatility is often a test. She expresses anger, frustration, or upset, sometimes about something seemingly minor. The man's instinct is to fix the problem, apologize, or defend himself. But what's actually being evaluated is whether he can remain centered when she becomes emotional. Can he listen without becoming defensive? Can he hold his frame without dismissing her feelings? Can he be present without being consumed by her emotional state? Pulling away is another common test. She becomes distant, stops initiating contact, seems less interested. The man's instinct is to chase, seek reassurance, try to win her back. But what's actually being tested is whether he has enough self-worth that he doesn't panic when her attention wavers. Can he maintain his own life and direction without her validation? Does his sense of self depend on her responsiveness? Mentioning other men is a test. She talks about a male friend, an ex, or someone who showed interest. The man's instinct is to feel jealous, competitive, or insecure. But what's actually being evaluated is whether he's secure enough that other men don't threaten him. Does he need to control her attention? Or is he confident that she'll choose him based on his genuine value? Why men fail these tests? Men fail these tests because they're responding to the surface content rather than the underlying dynamic. They think the test is about the specific issue, the argument topic, the reason for distance, the other man mentioned. So they address those surface issues logically and rationally. But the test is never about surface content. It's about the man's internal state. Does he need her approval? Does he panic when things feel uncertain? Does he compromise his boundaries to keep her happy? When a man consistently tries to win her approval, fix her moods, or prove his worth, he's demonstrating that his emotional state depends on her. This signals that he's not solid enough to be trusted with leadership or partnership in the way her unconscious biology is evaluating. The man who passes these tests doesn't do so through strategy or technique. He passes because he's genuinely centered in himself. When she's emotional, he's present, but not destabilized. When she pulls away, he respects her space without losing his own center. When she mentions other men, he's unaffected because his worth isn't determined by comparison. This isn't about being cold or indifferent. It's about being secure enough that her fluctuations don't create corresponding fluctuations in him. He's his own gravitational center, rather than orbiting around her emotional state. The collision of biology and ideology. Modern culture has experienced rapid changes in gender roles and expectations. Women have been encouraged to embrace traditionally masculine qualities: ambition, assertiveness, independence, leadership. They've been taught that traditional feminine roles were restrictive and that equality means similarity. But biological programming doesn't change in a few generations. The same neural circuits and hormonal systems that drove mate selection for hundreds of thousands of years are still operating. They're still responding to signals of strength, dominance, and masculine energy. This creates internal conflict. A woman's conscious ideology might embrace equality and sensitivity in men, but her unconscious biology might still respond most strongly to traditional masculine traits: confidence, leadership, the ability to remain unaffected by social pressure. She experiences attraction to qualities she's been taught to reject as outdated or problematic. She feels drawn to dynamics she's been told are regressive. Her body responds to one thing while her mind believes another: the confusion about wanting. This collision produces profound confusion about what women want. They consciously want one set of qualities because that's what aligns with their values and social programming. But they unconsciously respond to a different set of qualities because that's what their biology recognizes. A woman might genuinely believe she wants a sensitive, emotionally expressive partner who validates her constantly and defers to her preferences. But she might lose attraction to a man who actually embodies these qualities because they signal excessive accommodation rather than strength. Conversely, she might feel pulled toward a man who challenges her, maintains his own frame, and doesn't adjust himself to her moods. Even though this conflicts with her conscious preferences, she can't explain this attraction because it contradicts her stated values. This isn't hypocrisy. It's the natural result of being biological creatures with modern ideological overlays. The biology came first and runs much deeper. The ideology is newer and more superficial. When they conflict, biology usually wins, leaving the conscious mind confused and searching for explanations. Healthy relationships require some differentiation. When two people are too similar, when they share all the same qualities, occupy all the same space, and exhibit all the same behaviors, polarity diminishes. Polarity, the magnetic attraction between different energies, is crucial for sustained attraction. This doesn't mean rigid gender roles or inequality. It means that differences, including masculine and feminine energy differences, create dynamic tension that sustains interest. When men become excessively accommodating, emotionally reactive, and focused on their partner's approval, they're operating from feminine energy. When women become excessively independent, emotionally guarded, and unwilling to be receptive, they're operating from masculine energy. Two people operating from the same energy, regardless of which one, creates friendship rather than erotic attraction. The polarity that sustains romantic and sexual interest requires differentiation. This doesn't mean men can't be emotional or women can't be strong. It means that when men lose their masculine center entirely, when they become so focused on pleasing their partner that they have no independent direction, attraction typically fades. And when women are never receptive or vulnerable, when they can't let someone else lead in any domain, attraction typically fades. The modern insistence that equality means sameness has created relationships where polarity disappears. Partners become best friends who love each other, but aren't attracted to each other. They can't understand why the passion faded when they're so compatible. But compatibility isn't the same as attraction. Stop seeking validation. The root of most relationship dysfunction is external validation seeking. When your sense of worth depends on another person's response, you've given away your power. This manifests as constantly checking their reaction, adjusting your behavior to manage their moods, feeling anxious when they seem distant, feeling validated when they seem engaged. You're allowing someone else's fluctuating emotional state to determine your internal state. This is exhausting for both people. For you, because you're never at rest, always monitoring, adjusting, managing. For them, because they unconsciously sense your neediness, and it triggers their own anxiety about being responsible for someone else's emotional stability. The solution isn't to pretend you don't care. It's to genuinely develop a strong enough sense of self that you don't need constant external confirmation. Your worth is established by you, based on your values and how you live them, not by someone else's opinion or treatment of you. When you reach this state, your behavior naturally changes. You stop over-explaining, you stop defending yourself, you stop trying to convince anyone of your value. You simply live according to your own standards and let others draw their own conclusions. Develop independent purpose. Nothing makes a person more attractive than being genuinely absorbed in something beyond the relationship. When you have meaningful work, creative projects, physical challenges, or intellectual pursuits that captivate your attention, you stop orbiting around your partner's mood. This isn't a technique to create attraction. It's a genuine shift in how you allocate your life energy. When your purpose is strong enough, the relationship becomes something you want but don't need. It enhances your life rather than defines it. People sense this. They can feel the difference between someone who has made them their entire world and someone who has their own world that they're inviting the other person to join. The first creates pressure, the second creates attraction. When your partner knows they don't constitute your entire emotional universe, they stop feeling responsible for it. They're free to be themselves rather than managing your mood. And paradoxically, this makes them more likely to choose closeness rather than distance. Accept what is. Most relationship suffering comes from resisting reality. You want them to behave differently, communicate better, understand you more deeply, show more consistency. You spend enormous energy trying to change what is into what you want it to be. This accomplishes nothing except creating frustration. People change when they're ready, if they're ready. Your efforts to force change typically produce the opposite, resistance and withdrawal. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means clearly seeing what's actually happening rather than what you wish were happening. It means responding to reality rather than your idealized version of it. When you accept that someone is who they are, with all their contradictions, limitations, and patterns, you stop trying to fix them. You stop being disappointed when they behave consistently with who they've always been. You decide whether this reality works for you, rather than hoping it will transform into something different. This clarity is powerful. It ends the exhausting cycle of hoping for change while being repeatedly disappointed. It allows you to make decisions based on what is rather than what might someday be. Know your non-negotiables. Most people enter relationships without clear boundaries or standards. They're so focused on being chosen that they forget to evaluate whether the other person meets their requirements. Develop absolute clarity about what's non-negotiable for you. Not preferences. Everyone has preferences, but genuine deal breakers that you won't compromise on, regardless of attraction or potential. These might include how conflict is handled, basic life direction compatibility, fundamental values alignment, emotional availability, honesty, or how you're treated during disagreements. Once these are clear, enforce them consistently. Don't make exceptions because you're attracted or because you've invested time. When someone violates a non-negotiable, address it directly. If the behavior continues, exit without drama or explanation. This isn't rigidity, it's self-respect. It signals that you value yourself enough to walk away from what doesn't serve you, regardless of external pressure or internal attachment. Embrace comfortable silence. Most people are uncomfortable with silence, especially in tense moments. They fill it with explanation, justification, reassurance seeking, or attempts to resolve tension immediately. Learn to be comfortable with silence. When accused of something unfair, don't immediately defend yourself. When someone is upset, don't rush to fix it. When there's tension, don't try to smooth it over prematurely. Let silence do its work. Let people sit with their own emotions without you managing them. Let questions hang in the air unanswered. Let discomfort exist without immediately resolving it. This accomplishes several things. It prevents you from over-explaining or appearing defensive. It gives the other person space to move through their own emotional process. It demonstrates that you're not destabilized by tension or negative emotions. Most importantly, it prevents you from taking responsibility for emotional states that aren't yours to manage. Other people's discomfort isn't your emergency. Their need for reassurance isn't your obligation. Silence communicates this wordlessly. See without judgment. Everyone has aspects of themselves they hide. Shadow material, contradictions, behaviors that conflict with their self-image. Most people want to be seen only in their best light, but true intimacy requires being seen completely. When you can observe someone's full humanity, their fears, their pettiness, their manipulations, their wounds, without judgment or the need to fix them, you create rare safety. This doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. It means seeing difficult behavior for what it is, usually unconscious patterns or protective mechanisms, rather than personalizing it or trying to cure it. When someone tests you, see it as a test. When they sabotage closeness, see it as fear. When they're irrational, see it as emotion overriding logic. Don't take these things personally. Don't try to logic them out of their patterns. Just see clearly what's happening. This clarity protects you from getting drawn into drama while simultaneously creating space for authentic connection. People relax when they sense they're fully seen without judgment. They stop performing. They stop testing as intensely. They move toward genuine rather than defended, detachment as strength. The greatest relationship power comes from genuinely being willing to walk away, not as a manipulation tactic, but as a real acceptance that you'll be fine regardless of whether this particular person stays in your life. This isn't indifference. You can care deeply about someone while simultaneously knowing you don't need them for your well-being. You can prefer the relationship while accepting that you'll survive and thrive without it. This distinction is crucial. Neediness says, I must have this person or I won't be okay. Desire says, I enjoy this person and hope they stay, but I'll be fine either way. One creates desperate energy that pushes people away. The other creates attractive energy that draws people in. When you're genuinely detached from outcome, your behavior naturally aligns with self-respect. You don't tolerate poor treatment hoping things will improve. You don't chase when someone withdraws. You don't compromise your standards out of fear of loss. Paradoxically, this detachment often produces the outcome you wanted. People sense when they're not needed, and it makes them want to be chosen. But you can't fake this. Detachment as strategy is just neediness in disguise. Genuine detachment comes from knowing your worth independent of anyone else's recognition of it. The freedom of outcome independence. Most relationship anxiety comes from attachment to specific outcomes. You need them to respond in a certain way, commit to a certain timeline, behave according to certain standards. When reality doesn't match your requirements, you suffer. Outcome independence means being invested in your own values and actions while being unattached to how others respond. You behave according to your standards regardless of whether it produces the result you want. You're honest because that's who you are, not because honesty guarantees positive response. You maintain boundaries because you respect yourself, not because boundaries will make someone treat you better. You're present and engaged because that's how you approach relationships, not because it ensures reciprocation. This shift transforms relationships from negotiation to authentic expression. You stop calculating, if I do X, they'll do Y. You simply do what aligns with your values and let the chips fall where they may. This is simultaneously liberating and challenging. Liberating because you're no longer contorting yourself to manage someone else's response. Challenging because you have to tolerate them making choices you don't prefer without trying to control the outcome. But this is the only path to genuine partnership. When two people show up authentically without trying to manage each other's responses, real connection becomes possible. One of the most difficult relationship skills is distinguishing between someone's potential and their consistent pattern. Most people focus on potential, the good days, the moments of connection, the times they showed up well, but patterns are more predictive than potential. How someone behaves consistently over time, especially under stress or conflict, reveals who they actually are rather than who they might become. When someone repeatedly demonstrates certain behaviors, unavailability, inconsistency, dismissiveness, manipulation, believe the pattern. Don't focus on the exceptions. Don't wait for change that might never come. Don't invest in who they could be if only they worked through their issues. See clearly what is. Accept that this is who they are right now. Decide whether that reality works for you as it is, not as you hope it will become. This requires giving up the narrative of being the one who finally helps them change, the relationship that finally motivates their growth, the love that finally heals their wounds. These narratives are seductive but usually false. People change when they're internally ready, not because someone else inspires them. Your presence might be part of their journey, but you can't be the reason for it. They have to want change for themselves. Understanding isn't endorsement. Understanding psychological patterns doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. Knowing someone's behavior comes from unconscious programming doesn't obligate you to tolerate it. You can understand why someone tests, sabotages, or withdraws without making yourself available for that dynamic. You can have compassion for their wounds without taking responsibility for healing them. You can see clearly what drives their behavior while still maintaining standards for how you're treated. This balanced perspective is crucial. Pure understanding without boundaries becomes enabling. Pure boundaries without understanding becomes rigid. The integration of both allows you to see people clearly while treating yourself well. The path forward. If you find yourself repeatedly in dysfunctional relationship patterns, The solution isn't finding the right person. It's addressing what in you is drawn to dysfunction, what you're unconsciously seeking, what wounds you're trying to heal through others. This requires honest self-examination. What familiar pain are you recreating? What childhood dynamic are you trying to resolve? What do you actually respond to versus what you say you want? This work is uncomfortable. It requires confronting ways you might be participating in your own suffering. It means owning your patterns rather than blaming circumstances or other people. But this ownership is also empowering. If you're part of creating the pattern, you have power to change it. You're not a passive victim of other people's behavior. You're an active participant in dynamics you can choose to exit. Once you understand these dynamics, you can build relationships differently, not through technique or strategy, but through genuine transformation of how you show up. You stop seeking validation and start living according to your own standards. You stop trying to be what others want and start being authentically yourself. You stop tolerating what doesn't serve you and start enforcing real boundaries. You recognize testing for what it is without taking it personally. You see shadow material without judgment. You remain centered regardless of others' emotional fluctuations. Most importantly, you stop being desperate. Not through technique, but through genuinely developing a life that fulfills you, independent of romantic connection. The relationship becomes enhancement rather than salvation. This is the foundation for genuine partnership. Two people who are whole individually choosing to build something together, rather than two incomplete people trying to merge into wholeness through each other. The patterns described throughout this exploration aren't comfortable to confront. They challenge modern narratives about relationships, gender, and human behavior. They suggest that much of what we do is driven by forces we don't recognize and can't directly control. But discomfort isn't justification for avoiding truth. The unconscious patterns exist whether we acknowledge them or not. They influence behavior whether we see them or not. They drive outcomes whether we understand them or not. Seeing clearly doesn't make relationships easier, it makes them clearer. It allows you to stop taking personally what isn't personal. It helps you distinguish between conscious narrative and unconscious pattern. It enables you to respond to reality rather than illusion. Most importantly, understanding these dynamics helps you stop seeing yourself as a victim of others' incomprehensible behavior. You recognize that most people are driven by unconscious forces they don't understand. They're not deliberately trying to hurt you. They're acting out patterns that were established long before they met you. This understanding creates freedom. Freedom to stop trying to earn what someone is incapable of giving. Freedom to exit dynamics that serve no one. Freedom to build relationships on genuine foundation rather than hope and projection. The greatest power in relationships comes not from understanding others, but from understanding yourself, your patterns, your wounds, your unconscious drives. When you see clearly what's operating in you, you stop unconsciously participating in dysfunction. You stop seeking validation because you provide it for yourself.